You will build, no, not you.
No, not me.
Somebody else. Gonna go to sleep.
Oh, that definitely wasn't me.
Okay. I just want to make sure that the same might come to class and I want to see if you serve. Okay, so if you haven't turned in your exam, could you do so at the end, please? Is that yours? No. Okay, we have another exam not too long after this, but before I do that, I want to do something which is on your reading list, which I wasn't going to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's something that you normally, unless I'm wrong, you will never get at the university. You may have gotten it in high school, but you never will get it at the university. My guess is you will not get it at the university. It's something that's interesting. You have already confronted and will confront in the future, and it's fun and it's interesting. It's called Utopia. Some of you have an interest in this, and you can relax. So, I'm not going to quiz you on this, but it's a fascinating and interesting topic, and it's an idea that's haunted human beings for thousands of years. It's the notion of utopia. Okay, so I just want to present to you for about an hour this idea. It's part of this course. Since you have been working hard, asking good questions, we'll do this in transition to the next topic, which is communism. So, this utopia. Utopia. This notion of a place or a society, notion of a society, which is nowhere. There's no specific location associated with utopia. So it's really, I can't, if you ask me where is it, I can't tell you. And nor can the utopians say where it is. Honest. How are you, man? Good. How many of these? That's oh, okay. I thought you wrote two.
Sure.
That would. So this is a society which is nowhere, but for all utopians, it's somewhere that's good. So it has no particular location, but it is wherever it is, some entity, some society where people think it's good. So utopia, for many of these individuals, that is these utopians, is equivalent to a pleasant dream, a good dream. Now I say that in no way in a pejorative way. And the reason for that is because dreams, if you do not dream, you're not alive. That doesn't mean you're necessarily conscious of your dreams. But your dream, to be alive, is to dream. And dreams affect our behavior. You don't have to be a student of Freud to understand that. So dreams are part of your unconscious, there's an unconscious language, and your dreams affect your conscious language, and conversely, your conscious language affects your dreams. They overdetermine one another. The notion of overdetermination came from Freud. So dreams shape our behavior in all kinds of interesting ways, and utopian dreams have shaped and continue to shape and will shape what we do in our conscious lives. Okay? Now, some people call these utopian societies dreams that they want to put into practice. Some of them actually go so far as to try and create heavens on earth. That's the title of a book, a famous book on Utopia. Heavens on earth, dreams on earth. Also, that's the second thing. So, dreams affect us, and for some of these utopians, they want to put the dreams into practice to establish utopian societies, heavens on earth. Secondly, these utopian images that people write about also they're interesting because they often criticize existing societies. Sometimes the way to critique an existing society is to write about utopia. Okay? two most famous examples that I know, there are many, would be the Garden of Eden in the Bible. It's a critique of our society in terms of what a better, a good society could look like. And secondly, that which you might have read in high school, Sir Thomas More's Utopia, which is a very famous example of Utopia. For More, Sir Thomas More, he criticized the existing Britain of his day, which was very religious. His utopia was not religious, and he used his image of utopia to criticize the unfairness of the religious Britain of the day. See, when he tried to show that despite the importance of religion in that society, it was an unjust, unfair society. So it is really a critique of the practicing religion of Britain of the day, besides being an alternative society. So, to sum up, utopias, these notions of utopia are dreams that shape us, and they also provide us with criticisms of the existing societies that have done that for thousands of years. Let me turn then to one of the most famous of them, which is an idea of a golden age. So these are often thought to be myths of a golden age. Okay? And the one I want to consider, and I want to link it to the socialism we've been discussing so far, the one I want to discuss, which is what you've all experienced in one way or the other, so I can take it as a common piece of knowledge, even if you're not studying it, which is the Garden of Eden. Okay, so let me give you this interpretation of this kind of utopia, which has been around for a long time. First, the needs of Adam and Eve were many, not terribly surprising. But, in fact, in the Garden of Eden, in that notion of utopia, it doesn't matter. The needs of human beings do not matter. Why? The reason is because resources are unlimited. Why? Because God supplies everything. So it's because God removes the constraint on resources by providing manna from heaven, then the needs of human beings can be satisfied. Their unlimited needs have no problem in terms of being satisfied. No labor has to be performed in the Garden of Eden, as you know. That's the reason for it. There's no labor that's required in the Garden of Eden because God takes care of all the labor. It's a utopia. The result, in that poetic expression of the Bible, is a perfect harmony between Adam and Eve and between nature and Adam and Eve. So everything is in balance, in harmony. There's a harmonious aspect to the Garden of Eden. As I'm doing this, speak of socialism and what these people have argued. There's a common identity which exists in this utopia. Commonness. And collectivity, which is very clearly in the tale of the Bible. Everyone, every animal, Adam and Eve, everyone has something in common. They are all children of God. That's their commonality. Now, and that binds them together, of course. That commonality. What might be the ruin of Garden of Eden? What undermines it? Well, when Adam and Eve are cast out of this utopia, then they have to labor. Notice the lines in the Bible, if you recall. The minute they get cast out is the moment they, and of course, Adam and Cain and Abel, have to labor in the fields to do what? To produce wealth. And therefore, they must choose amongst their wealth because, why? Because their wealth is limited, and hence they must make choices. It's limited by what? It's limited by scarce resources, by their labor in the land. God no longer takes care of their needs by providing unlimited resources. There's a scarcity by being cast out of the Garden of Eden. What's the socialist? How do you overcome scarcity? You create a new utopia, socialism. Now, private property for these socialists is quite parallel to God casting out Adam and Eve from this utopia and creating this scarcity of resources. So the idea, the parallelism, is that human beings have acted like gods. Human beings have cast themselves out of utopia and created, and if you want, an artificial scarcity, which is private ownership of the means of production, land and so forth, etc. And that can cause less wealth to be produced than otherwise. That's your first exam. That was question one. So the notion of private property plays the role of a constraint on wealth in society, because people have the right under property to withhold their wealth. Profit rate falls, competition, profit rate falls, and then businesses will withhold their wealth, they'll unemploy labor, unemploy capital to survive. So it's not terribly, whether they're conscious of it or not is a different question. Many of these socialists deploy this notion of property ownership in terms of this being cast out of the Garden of Eden and then facing this constraint. They create their own constraint of private property and therefore they can get rid of it. That's the socialist idea. Human beings have created it and then they can eliminate it to do what? To get back to a utopia in which private property no longer exists. That is, everybody in society has a common identity. They all own property in common. Conclusion. There is a dream, okay, for the socialists. A Garden of Eden. It is nowhere, but also is someplace that is good, and if it can be established, there exists a world of harmony, plenty, and a common humanity amongst individuals. They are no longer alienated from one another as they were because they all have property in common. I'm going to add to this labor in a moment. That's given the property moment. There are different forms of this golden age or utopia. It could be the Garden of Eden. And you've read some of this stuff. It could be Paradise Lost. Milton's Paradise Lost. It could be Shangri-La in that novel and the movie that was made in the 30s. So these things have existed throughout human history. And sometimes they've inspired human beings to put into practice actually functioning utopian societies. For example, you get some of this in the course of religion or history. After the death of Christ, there were utopian communities that were established in the Near East. Okay, so after Christ dies, there were a number of individuals inspired by the writings of the disciples, and they established communist societies, utopian societies in which all property was held in common, everybody labored, no one could not labor, and they distributed as they could wealth on the basis of need. And some of these are written down in the manuscripts, the lost scrolls that recently were discovered. Second, when Columbus comes to the United States, he thought he had discovered a Garden of Eden. That's what he called it. Okay? It's a new world for him, and for many other writers, became a kind of Garden of Eden, in which it looked at him as if the resources were unlimited. The French Revolution of 1798 was inspired by utopian tales. They wanted to establish many of them. This kind of society based upon liberty, equality, and brotherhood for all. There were utopian communities established across the history of Europe and in the United States, some of which I put in your reading list. And the Bolshevik Revolution of 1970s, to go back, the Quakers were originally a utopian, they still exist to this day, utopian. The original Mormons, utopian societies. The Amana Society, these are all utopian societies, the Shakers, utopian societies that were established across American history. The Bolshevik Revolution had its utopian roots. You read Engels. He's struggling with that's what he calls it. He's struggling with the utopian socialist. He's respectful of them, but he wants to differentiate his notion of socialism from theirs. Okay? And in fact, it continues until some people today would argue, there are few in number, but they argue very strongly, they believe the end of the present world will usher in a new kind of utopia. You've heard individuals who make this kind of claim. The Messiah will deliver the few who believe in this to a new kind of utopia. Many of these notions of utopia, if not all of them, are collectivist in nature. They emphasize again and again collective, community. That's why you get this emphasis on collectivization of the means of production and the market. They emphasize again and again the collectivity to eliminate this scarcity, what they claim is this artificial scarcity on resources. So they aim to deliver a society which will basically deliver the majority, the poor, from the poverty and establish this community of interests, this brotherhood of all for all. In this hoped for and desired new world, the focus is on the collective, the social, rather than the private, of nature of individuals. So that's why, again, private ownership of the means, the ability to sell your goods on a private market are downgraded, and planning and collectivization are upgraded. Okay, so collectivization means collectivization, social planning. And thirdly, the third feature now, everybody is to labor. There will be no individual who has the right or whatever not to labor in this kind of society. So everybody is going to labor. So these individuals then are going to emphasize the laboring of all, the elimination of private property and markets, and hence that's going to unleash the ability of these societies to produce great wealth, which then will be distributed on the basis of need. You can see that Marx and Engels were influenced by this, even though they're extraordinarily critical of these utopias. Now, I have to be very careful on this, and I should at this point, because this emphasis on the collectivity and the social over the private is also present in other kinds of utopian dreams, which are most distasteful to individuals. For example, in the Hitler's Third Reich, there was also, Nazi Germany, there was also a continual emphasis on the collectivity over the individual. Here the collectivity was to operate, focused on and operate for the benefit of the state, of the nationhood, okay? Over everything else, over everything, the state was the emphasis rather than the individual. So it can be on the right as well as the left. So that's number one. Number two, there's always a tension, including in the United States right now, between the individual and the collective. This is sometimes called the most individualistic of societies, but that's not accurate. There's always a tension, and always has been in the United States, between the emphasis on the individual and the emphasis on the collectivity. It's throughout our history. For example, economics, which I'm most familiar with. In economics, you have two kinds of economic theorizing, which divide with one another in non-Marxian economics. So non-Marxian economics branches into two. You've all studied them. Micro and macro. Microeconomics, neoclassical theory, is individualism. It's the great contribution of Smith. It focuses upon the individual, and from the individual, it constructs a society. Macroeconomics, as the Keynes, focuses on the collectivity. The collective, via the visible hand of the state, is to intervene to solve the problems created by individuals. So, neoclassical and Keynesian theory have been struggling with one another ever since Keynes invented his collectivist theory in the 1930s, right after the present. Sometimes one is dominant, sometimes the other, and they fight with each other, and the economists fight with each other, within departments and across departments. Keynesian versus neoclassical economic theory. So whenever we have a recession, then the Keynesian theory comes forward, and we emphasize the need for the state to intervene to save society of individuals from itself. That is what does the state do? It tries to intervene to control, regulate markets, run deficits, and so forth to get the economy out of recession. The minute the state does that, the individualists rise up and say, oh my God, no. The state intervening in society is going to undermine individual incentives. So there's a continual oscillation in economics between these two different views. It's never one or the other. It's always both, and that's what you struggle with when you study economics. Now, next point, which is something which is quite different than the neoclassical and the Keynesians. Utopians, in general, believe something very, very different than what most economists believe. It's a very powerful idea. They believe that human nature is malleable. For them, there is no such thing as a given human nature. They believe and argue that human nature is not a given. It's not given in the genes of an individual. Rather, they believe, irrespective of the form of utopia, they believe, in general, that human beings can be transformed. And, in fact, many utopians believe, if not all of them, that human beings can be improved. By transforming nature, by transforming the nature of human beings, you can improve the nature. So there's no fundamental barrier exists to this transformation. And for some of these utopians, who are informed by religion, because a lot of these utopians were religious communities, like the Quakers and the Shakers, for those communities that were informed by religion, they believe that there is no end to this kind of transformation. This is part of religion, which, many of you, if not all of you, have studied one form or the other. You know, as the minister, the priest, rabbi teaches you, the transformation of human nature by the study of religion improves human nature and you get closer to God. That's what religion does. It allows you to become a more perfect human being and you approach perfection, which of course is God. So that's why you study the Bible and so forth, etc. But the utopians take that image and they say, look, establishing the society, and it could be society with a religion, enables human beings to alter their nature, to become better human beings. With the ultimate limit, they'll become some kind of perfection. So utopian is the notion of perfection on earth, heaven on earth, in which the very establishment of the utopia allows individuals to change and to approach the best that they can as human beings. They get closer and closer to this idea of the best of a good person. Okay? Let me juxtapose that with a very different idea. The very different idea is that human nature is given. It's a very different idea. This has come up in this course before. It'll come up for the rest of your life, as a matter of fact. It's a very different idea, which is the nature of a human being is a given, and there's nothing you can do about it. Versus the idea that human nature is malleable and is always changing. Those are two very different ideas. This idea that human nature is a given, what that means is as follows, is that the tastes of an individual, the desires of an individual, the attitudes of an individual to wealth and labor and so forth, those are all things that are given in the nature of human beings. And there's nothing that can be done to alter that. Utopians traditionally believe just the opposite. Everything can be done to alter those tastes, those attitudes towards labor and so forth, etc. So you have a struggle going on here between these two different notions of nature. Some people will argue, yeah, you can establish a utopian society, but it's inevitably going to collapse because of human nature. I mean, some of you probably have given that kind of argument in other forms, not necessarily with utopia, but with something else. It's in human nature to do whatever you're claiming it's going to do. Other people say, no, human nature is malleable. So let me give you the most famous notions in economics, again, it's the one I'm most familiar with, of the idea that human nature is given. So These are ideas that argues against what I just presented to you as part of the economics field. Okay? There, the most famous individualistic theories that were presented in the 17th and 18th centuries, where it all starts, were by three individuals. They happen to be British. Hobbes, Locke, and Smith. These are the people I think that you would have studied in high school or at the university. Thomas Hobbes, okay? This is in the 1600s in England. Comes up, he's a philosopher, so this is a big book, so I'm going to summarize it in a few sentences. Very unfair to Hobbes. Suppose people are born, now listen to the language. Suppose people are born naturally aggressive and naturally acquisitive. Now, he didn't say this, I'll just add it. It's in their genes. We didn't even know genes in those 1600s, the 17th century. That theory hasn't been invented. But suppose, I'll add that, suppose that's the way that people are born. They're naturally aggressive and naturally acquisitive. In economics, naturally acquisitive, that means, it took years to develop this, non-satiation. S-A-T-I-A-T-I-O-N. That means human beings always want more rather than less. Where does that come from? That's in your genes. You're born with it. And you're aggressive in terms of your wanting more rather than less. You've got this. Make sure, because it's very important, because everything's going to follow from this. Assumption about human beings. They are not altruistic. They are selfish. They want more for themselves, and they'll take aggressive action to get more for themselves. So the assumption here about human beings is like an assumption. It's like, I once had a pet, a dog, Holly, and she wanted always more rather than fewer bones. I would give her one bone, she would want two. I'd give her two, she would want three. And then she would never eat those bones, she would take them and bury them. She just wanted them for herself. And if you tried to take the bone from her, that was my dog. If I tried to take that bone from her, she would bite me. Or she did that. Then I would bite her and stop. She was naturally acquisitive. Bones! And she was aggressive. But human beings do something that dogs don't do, according to Hobbes. That even if they're weak dogs, but they're still aggressive and acquisitive, they will form coalitions with other human beings, something dogs often don't do. They will form coalitions. What? To do what? To take away the bones from other people. So Hobbes made a striking conclusion. He said the following. Each individual is born with, has in his or her human nature, these two traits, aggression and acquisitive. You want more bones and to be acquisitive. And if you leave individuals alone, if you don't just leave them alone with these traits, then we're going to have, in his words, a war of all against all. The dogs will kill each other. So he predicted for society strife. The human condition was strife and anarchy. And his solution, for those of you who read this, Hobbes not only explains why there will be strife in society, he's given a theory of why there's going to be conflict in society. And his solution to this, pretty much, it's just, yeah, man.
The Commonwealth?
Almost. What will produce this common interest? What will stop people from killing each other?
A government.
Precisely. Good for you, man. So, well, his solution to this was for a strong state government to be established and to intervene in society to stop people from killing each other once you give them the freedom to act in their own self-interest. So Thomas Hobbes is famous in political science because he provides the first coherent theory of the state. This is what you just said, theory of the government. He did this a long time ago. So you can see where it's a rationale for strong state, for the king. King like Thomas Hobbes. Because it was an explanation of why the king, the despot, was necessary to stop people from killing each other. Once you assume that as individuals, that's the way they're born. So that if you give them the freedom to act in their own self-interest, and those are the freedoms that were arising at the time of the 1600s, instead of getting strife, you will get a commonwealth. You will get a society. Thomas Hobbes is the theory then for the strong state. So human nature is not malleable, it's given, and given human nature, you're going to get a freaking mess in society unless you have the arm of the state. Locke comes along and says, no, you don't need a state. You don't need this despot. You don't need this Leviathan to intervene in this way. Rather, all we need is a social contract. Let's just make a contract with one another that we don't kill each other. That we don't, let's have laws in society that prevent us from taking each other's bones and forming coalitions. A social contract. And that way we'll get harmony in society. So Locke comes up with a way to argue against Hobbes' need for a strong state. That's such a tremendous breakthrough. But both of them are individualist theories. Both of them are assuming aggression and this acquisitive spirit in the part of individuals. The third guy that comes along, who's the greatest of them all probably, is Adam Smith. 1776. So this is after these guys. And Adam Smith says, yes, people are naturally aggressive. That's never going to change. People are naturally acquisitive. That's never going to change. That's in their genes. That's the way they're born. It ain't going to change in that way for thousands of years, and it's going to continue. But we do not need a strong state like Hobbes. We don't need a dictator. And the social contract that we need has only two features which are necessary. What are they? What's the contribution of Adam Smith? What's going to produce harmony? What are these two features? What have we discussed in this course? Yeah.
Markets.
I can't hear you.
Private property and markets.
Private property, I need an adjective on the markets.
Free markets.
Okay, perfect. So Mr. Smith comes up with what these socialists are arguing against. Mr. Smith comes up with private property and competitive markets, or as the gentleman said, free markets. So let's put it all together. 18th century, just when the Industrial Revolution is getting underway, and capitalism is beginning to flourish and break forth and so forth. Smith comes forward and says, okay, just like you, Smith, Locke, I assume private aggression and people are naturally aggressive and naturally acquisitive. That's in the gene. I'm going to give them the freedom to follow their natural aggression and acquisitive spirit. I'm going to let them do that. I'm going to let every single dog accumulate as many bones as he can. And they can take their bones and they can sell them in the market for whatever goddamn price they want. I'm going to give them that freedom. Remember Engels? I'm going to give them that freedom. Act in their own self-interest. But if society establishes private property and competitive markets, then, says Smith, I'm going to show you how a society will then achieve two things. The maximum wealth it's capable of achieving. So he entitles his book The Wealth of Nations. The maximum wealth they're capable of achieving and a perfect harmony. That's called modern neoclassical theory, new theory after Adam Smith. So Smith that's his vision. And for the next 250 years, economists, microeconomists, have filled out his vision. That's a vision of what? A utopia. You can't tell me utopia doesn't matter. because that's the utopia we live under in the United States. Almost what's the reason? What's the reason behind the continual push to cut taxes by Republican legislators? What I just taught you. The state taxes people, and that enables the state to become more powerful in society, which undermines private property and competitive markets. That's the counter theory. That's the Adam Smith theory, which argues against the intervention of the state. So don't tell me that utopia doesn't matter, because it matters in the states now. So Smith's utopia is the kind of theory which drives policy every single day of every year in the states. In this individualist theory. Then the economy has a problem. Big surprise. There's a million different reasons why the economy has a problem. The economy has a problem, so you get less wealth than it's capable of achieving. You have strife in society, and then what? The Keynesians come around and they emphasize, look, the state has to intervene to tame the aggression and the inquisitive spirit of individuals. It has to tame it, otherwise we'll kill each other. How? We'll have prolonged recessions and depressions, and that will entice the communists and the socialists to come upon the scene once more. So that's the struggle between these characters. Okay? So economics has always been a struggle between individualist and collectivist theories. For all of its history, especially after the 1930s when Mr. Keynes invented his Keynesian theory. So the solution for society, for Hobbes, was a strong state. The solution for Mr. Locke was a social contract. And then the solution for Mr. Smith, which is the one we live under, was private property and competitive markets. If you are I'm not saying that anybody in this class is necessarily this, but there is a strong conservatism amongst the economists in the States, not in my department, but other departments. They argue something which is, as far as I can understand it, very, very logical. These are conservatives now. These are not Keynesians or neoclassicists in that sense. They argue that if you assume that people are aggressive, and if you assume that people are acquisitive, and if Smith is right, then you establish private property and competitive markets. But if you make that same assumption, then these individuals, who are naturally aggressive and acquisitive, will capture the market and capture private property and use it to their own interest. In other words, the conservative argues there's no way to hold on to private markets and competitive markets from the aggressive and acquisitive state of individuals, because they'll just turn on property and undermine it, turn on the markets and undermine it. You understand that? In contrast to this, all of this in any case, the utopians believe nothing. There's no such thing as a given, unchangeable trait of aggression and acquisition. The very society that gets established can modify what Smith and Hobbes and Locke and other people assume is given in the nature of human beings. For them, human beings are always malleable, and you build a proper society, you can change the human beings. That's the struggle, one of the struggles between these two different individuals. There are features of utopia that utopians have in common. Let me list them for you. Basically, there's four. First, they all have in common elimination of private property and to replace it with collective. That's kind of a common feature across them. So everyone owns everything if they are members of the collective. Now, it varies. For the Bolsheviks, what they wanted to collectivize was just the means of production. They weren't interested in refrigerators and shoes. That could be private. Other utopians, For example, the Quakers or Shakers, they wanted to collectivize everything. So everything, even including clothing, was owned in common. There was no private property of any sort in the communities they established across the United States. Anyways, elimination of private property and its replacement by collective ownership. Second, to reorganize labor time, which I mentioned to you, so that everybody labors. Nobody in the society cannot labor. I mean, if you're very sick or if you're a child, I understand. But everybody else is adult and is not sick labors. Third, distribution of wealth on the basis of need. Remember that? From Mr. Marx and that's where they get it from. The distribution of wealth on the basis of need, rather than contribution of individuals to produce that wealth. That's not Adam Smith, but that's what it is. Fourth, reason and education are to teach members of the collectivity of the Utopia the way to reach this better life. To teach them all, I quote now, all but have one heart and soul. All have but one, let me add that, all have but one heart, mouth, and soul. Let me give you a Kautsky. All may have but one heart and mouth. He stole that from the Utopians without any footnote, if you were correct. So these four features, or at least the first two, collective ownership and reorganization of labor time, are thought, the first two, are thought to remove the scarcity constraint. That's what these people are after. Collective ownership of the property enables the existence of resources to be available to all. So when the whites first came to America, they were enamored with and scared of the American Indian nations not having collective ownership, not having private ownership of the land. It was very interesting to them and very scary to them that the land did not belong to individuals. It belonged to the Indian nation as given to them by the spirits. And they came from a different, and you all know these tales, they came from a different environment, the whites, in which they had private ownership. And so it wasn't terribly surprising that they could purchase Manhattan from the American Indian nation, and the American Indian nation had never understood they could sell that which they didn't own. So, collective ownership of wealth enables the society to remove that constraint because no one individual has the right with collective ownership to withhold his or her means of production. That right is gone. No one individual could compel other individuals to work for him or her because everybody owns the means of production in common. You don't have to sell your labor power to anybody because you own the means. Second, reorganization of labor time means an enormous increase in labor because everybody labors. Everybody works in the community. No one has the right to withhold his or her labor unless sick, aged, or child. So these two things, these two aspects in this logic enable more wealth to be produced and therefore to be distributed. That's how they get more wealth once they eliminate these private ownership of the means and the right of people to withhold their labor from production. Additionally, in this new society that eliminates private property and eliminates private right to withhold your labor, you have the presence of a new culture. You have religion, for some utopians, you have reason and education. For other utopians, reason and education, that's Sir Thomas More. Religion, that's for some of the religious utopians. You have this education which educates people in this new utopian society. And it changes them because they assume that human nature can be changed. So you put it all together, in Utopia, human beings have become more perfect. More wealth is available to them. Their nature is changing such that you're producing a brotherhood and sisterhood in society. And you have recreated a kind of Garden of Eden on Earth. That's what these characters are after. Conclusion. So the utopians are after, or they want to create a humanity, which would be nice instead a commonwealth, in which we finally overcome as human beings the property and labor barriers, which we as human beings have created amongst us. So utopians see themselves as progressive in nature, in the sense of developing a new kind of society. Sometimes you will run into, not in this course, because I don't have time to do it, but sometimes you will run into, just finish now. Sometimes you will run into a different kind of utopian image. It's called anarchism, by anarchists, people who practice that. These individuals want to eliminate the state because they think the state itself is the source of problems. It's kind of a very conservative view of the state that I just gave you, which ends up in saying get rid of the state, because the state is the source of the problems. But what I'm after is in that anarchist theory. By the way, since you may have read this guy, a famous anarchist, his name was Tolstoy. Remember the famous Russian writer who was a famous anarchist? He got the World War and peace. In that view, that anarchist view of society, the anarchists believe that human nature can change. The very elimination of the state will eliminate the strife amongst us, which the state is supposed to solve. So, human nature changes once you create a new kind of society. So in that sense, they're utopians too. In this new society, then, in which we have created this humanity, because we've overcome private property and overcome this constraint of labor. No one has the right to withhold this labor. No one has the right to withhold this property. In this new society, then, all labor is to be done for the common good. All workers are, that is, everybody labors. And we have then more wealth that can be produced, which then can be distributed to people on the basis of their needs. And these utopian societies, when they were established, that's precisely what they did. So in the United States, for example, the Shakers began to distribute wealth. They were by the way, they were very, very successful in terms of wealth production. So they started to distribute their wealth to the individuals in the society on the basis of different needs. You know Shakers, Shaker furniture. You know the seeds that you can buy these seeds that you can plant for flowers. Well, the Shaker furniture invented by the Shakers, the seeds invented by the Shakers. So they became a very, very profitable and successful community. Everybody labored in that society, except for the ill and the infirm and so forth. Everybody held property in common. There was no private property. And they prospered. And when they prospered, roughly from the 1850s to the turn of the century, it was the most successful utopian, one of the most successful, if not the most successful utopian community in the United States. Why did they end? Anybody study this?
They didn't have children.
They did not have children. So they relied upon incoming population. And why did they have children? What?
Well, they adopted children. And then
Yes, but why did they not biologically have children?
because of religion.
And what did their religion prevent them from doing? I don't want to be particular, to make you nervous or anything, but it prevented them from.
Having sex.
Yeah. So the Shakers were not allowed under the religion to have, as she said nicely, to have children. So they were prevented, men and women were prevented from joining with one another to have children. And so they were relied upon outside. By the way, you know why? God knows why I know anything about Shakers. But, why did they shake? They shake to release the sexual repression from not engaging with one another. Communities are very interesting in what they do. I suppose it's kind of like the way you dance. Now that's yes, sir. In this new society, then, in this new society that's being established, in these utopian societies, labor then binds everybody, because everybody's laboring. Labor binds everyone to one another. Common ownership of the property binds everybody to one another. Everybody's rewarded according to the needs that binds. So, what you end up with is a kind of collectivity in which everybody labors and has an interest and an incentive for laboring for the benefit of all. Okay? That's utopia. That's what's driving many of these individuals, including the revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks, the Maoists, and the rest of these individuals, whether they're conscious of it or not. Now let me give some criticisms of this, like we do in the course. I don't mean to upset you and disturb you, because everything, you can criticize everything. So I don't mean to undermine and take away from what they did. That's part of life. You've got this positive, and then you've got the criticism of that which is put forward. And I'll do this from a surplus labor perspective, because criticisms always emanate from some perspective. And since we've been emphasizing this surplus labor, so let me do that. There is no explicit notion in all these utopias, including the Garden of Eden and the Bible, of surplus labor. It's just not there. It's not terribly surprising, because that's the one that Marx invented. So it's not present. So societies can establish, and many have, these four features, including the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. But there too, these socialists or communists, whatever you want to call them, they neglected or forgot about the organization of surplus, and hence it wasn't the utopia that they claimed it was. So, we can have a utopia which has collective ownership, which has planning, in which everybody labors, and which you have a culture which teaches all of that to individuals. That is, you believe that human beings are malleable, they can change their nature, and so you make them work for the common good, and so forth, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you've eliminated class exploitation. That's the problem. That's a criticism of these societies from a surplus labor perspective. That's the ironic result, whether it be in the former Soviet Union or in Cuba today. Everybody may labor. Everybody in the society may labor. Number one. Number two, everybody might own the means of production. Number three, all markets might be planned. So we don't have competitive markets, we have planned markets. You still have to have markets, but you need an adjective, whether they're planned or unplanned. Okay, so not at the distribution of wealth, you need a market. But there are different ways to organize the market. Planning is a planned market in which planners set the price, which will equilibrate supply and demand. So, you have planned markets, you might have collective ownership, everybody might labor, and you have a culture that supports this kind of utopian ownership of the means of production, this utopian notion everybody's left, that everybody labors, and this utopian notion of how wealth is going to be distributed via planning. But it's still possible in that society to have a subgroup of workers appropriating the surplus from the rest of the workers. That subgroup labors, it satisfies the utopian image, but nonetheless, it still appropriates the surplus from these other workers. Okay. So the subgroup of laborers, they labor, because that's part of the rules, for the common good. They too produce wealth. But they're also in the position to appropriate and then, of course, to distribute the wealth that other individuals produce. That happens in the Shakers and the Quakers. So despite the fact they established these utopian societies, they also established, and we're not aware of it, we're not conscious of it, this kind of class exploitation. And that helped bring them down along with other problems. And that's what I have to show you in the former Soviet Union. We're almost there when we get to how that worked in that kind of society. So, to conclude, the establishment of utopia is not necessarily the establishment of communism in the terms in terms of the workers who produce the surplus also appropriate. There's no necessity that communism, there's no necessity that utopia implies collective production and appropriation of surplus by those same workers. But let me be fair. The establishment of a communist fundamental class process, I'll remind you what that means, we're going to get to it in a moment. The establishment of a communist fundamental class process means that the workers who produce also appropriate and distribute. The same collectivity produces and appropriates. The establishment of that process doesn't necessarily mean that you have established a good society. A utopia. So you're getting everything now. You're getting the subtlety on both sides. The establishment of a communist fundamental class process eliminates exploitation. But there's no necessity that all kinds of other conflicts and strife have been eliminated in that society. You can't draw those kinds of deductions. Okay, so the next step, and I'm going to begin it now in 15 minutes, and then I'll give you an exam, not on this, but in the next step, I'll give you an exam on communism. What is communism from this surplus labor perspective? So, let's begin. So I'm examining now, and I'm going to go back and redo it again, because I know it can be confusing. I'm establishing now a theory, and I know you've never seen this before or heard this, a theory of communism from a surplus labor perspective. That's the entry point. We have then, if I'm going to start with this fundamental class process of communism, a communist fundamental class process, it has two features which are important. First, which is the one I've been saying. The producers of the surplus are the same group as the appropriators and distributors of the surplus. It has to be an identity. Those who produce are the identical group as those who appropriate and distribute that surplus. That's one feature. Second feature, it has to be collective in nature. That's where the adjective communist comes from. It has to be collective in nature. What I mean by that is not individual. Let me compare and contrast this communist fundamental class process with the capitalist one. Right away. What's the difference between the two? In capitalism, in the United States today, the last 100 years, there's no question that it's been more collective than individual. What do I mean? Well, what I mean very simply is that the capitalist fundamental class process is collective in nature. But what? Well, corporate boards of directors appropriate the surplus, not as individuals, but rather as a corporate collectivity. So people who sit on the boards do not get the profits as individuals. They get it as a collectivity. Marx calls this, nicely, the brotherhood of capitalists. They get it as a family, under the law, under the culture, and under economics. So what the hell's the difference between this and communist fundamental class processes? They're both collective. I can't emphasize this first one. I can't emphasize enough because many people in capitalism believe that it's individual. It's only individual in a private, individually owned and run business, what's called a small business. But the vast amount of wealth is produced in a collectivist manner and appropriated in a collectivist manner, which are corporations. What's the difference then between the communism and capitalism? Because they're both collective. Well, the difference is then, in capitalism, the workers produce the surplus, but a different group appropriates it and distributes it. It's not the same collectively. That's the subtle difference between the two. Let's take another class, fundamental class process. The first one we just studied in the course, the ancient. We'll go back and pick it up. In the ancient class process, which I just mentioned to you, there a single individual both produces, appropriates, and distributes the surplus. A single individual. The owner-operated business. Real small business. That's similar to communism. It's one of its great appeals. It's similar to communism. Why? Because the people who produce the profits get it. It's one of the appeals of small business. You don't work for anybody. Nobody works for you. You're your own boss. Boss of what? Surplus, profits. What's its difference between communism and capitalism? Is that it's not collective in nature. It's individual. Whereas in communism, yes, the workers produce the surplus, but they get it as a collectivity. In the ancient, they get it as individuals. The great paradox in the States and other places, the irony of it, is that we operate under the ideology. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean it's culture. We operate in the culture, under a culture of the ancient, but yet it's a capitalist society. We think we get the surplus, and you raise your hand, you tell me that in class, the first part of this course, and I always have to correct you. No. People don't get in capitalism the profits as individuals. They get it as the board of directors, as the collectivity. Then they distribute it, the dividends, to the owners and so forth, etc. You always look at things funny like. And I understand that because the ideology is that that's not how it's done. The culture is, no, it's individual. It isn't. It hasn't been for a long time. We may start out with the ancient, but we ended up with capitalism. So we have collectivities in capitalism producing, and we have collectivities appropriating the surplus. The problem is they're different collectivities. The ancient, we have the individual producing and appropriating and distributing, but it's not collective. They're not corporations. Whereas in communism, it's both collective and the groups are the same. Questions? That's the difference amongst these processes. Let me compare them with the others. In a feudal fundamental class process, there's a difference between the producers and appropriators of surplus. Serfs produce, lords appropriate and distribute. And it's very rarely collective in history. Very rarely. It was always individual. An individual lord appropriating the surplus from his or her peasants, serfs. Slavery. Here again, it was very rare to have it collective. Typically, it was individual. Slaves produced surplus, that is, as collectivity. Slaves produced surpluses, but for their masters as individuals. There was individual appropriation, although it was collective production of the surplus. It's only in communism that you have then this commonality between the collective producers and collective appropriators of the profits. Questions on that before I go to the next step? Okay, so if I ask you to differentiate between the communist and the non-communist fundamental class processes, could you write a simple, 5-page, 4-page, 3-page essay on that, double spaced? I have the same reaction you do. It depends. Okay, so the idea then is establish in the communism, get rid of this non-communist fundamental class process, establish the capitalist communist fundamental class process, get rid of the capitalist. Now, how do you do that? Let's follow. Let me go back to the logic. by establishing its conditions of existence. To establish any one process, to create that, you have to establish the political, economic, the cultural, if you want, the natural processes that have to be in place that literally create that single process. So it's to establish in the society, then, this communist fundamental class process, which once again, the same collectively produces and appropriates and distributes the surplus, you need its non-class processes present, whose effect is this communist fundamental class process. The same thing goes for capitalism or slavery or feudalism. They all have that in common. Okay? So, what are the non-class processes which will enable this communist fundamental class process to exist? You get the logic? We've established the communism, what it is, and now we're saying, in order to secure what it is, you have to establish in society what it's not, which are all the non-class processes. Politics, economic, culture, and of course nature. What are they? Well, you need to establish the culture which would enable people to both produce and appropriate and distribute surplus. You have to establish the politics, the laws, and the rules which would allow that. And of course, you have to establish the economics which would allow that. And it's like, of course, you also have the nature has to be present. You need sun up in the sky and so forth. For all these different class structures. So, a society has to establish, just like it did for capitalism, just like it did for feudalism and slavery, etc., all the non-class processes which will enable it to exist. Let's take culture first, and I'll stop. What the hell is the culture of communism? And you can ask the same question, the parallel question, what's the culture of capitalism? Let me pose it this way for a moment. What's the culture in our society which enables class exploitation to continue? Can you think of anything? It's a bizarre question, right? Class exploitation is nasty, kind of a cancer. So what might be the culture, what I mean by culture, to remind you, what might be the different forms of thought present in U.S. society which enables class exploitation to continue and prosper? That's the question. Okay, man.
Maybe that you
I'm sorry?
have to work to earn things.
You have not.
Just that you have to work to earn things. Like you want something, you have to work for it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Freedom and opportunity.
Okay. Yes?
Well, I think freedom and opportunity and working for things are both part of the communist utopia. So I'd say,
Just
in
stay
the
with
US
this one.
society specifically, it's like a dog-eat-dog individualist approach.
Good. Yeah.
That you work 8 hours, you don't go home after 4.
Okay, he's doing this complicated one. Is that, but he's doing what I taught you in the blackboards. Let me read you what you just did. People have to work. People have to cover their wages in 4 hours, but they work 4 more hours for unpaid labor. And then, yeah,
Sort of a meritocratic system where you have to earn the right to make the decisions.
absolutely. Everything you say, I agree with. I want to add one more. And it's appropriate for this class. People are completely unawares of what they're doing. There is no awareness in the U.S. society of class exploitation. You are aware of it because I force you to be. That if you're not aware of it, I'll flunk you. So that's my power over you. I'm being very honest with you. So, that's what progressives do. I'm just being honest about it. If you don't adhere to what I teach, I fail you. You heard me make jokes about that. Every professor does that. I just am honest. People, if they're not aware that they're doing as what this guy did over here, if they're not aware that they're doing unpaid labor, why worry about it? You're worried about a purple elephant. It doesn't exist. So there is a culture present in capitalism which makes us not be aware of class exploitation, in addition to everything else you mentioned. What is that culture that's present that makes us unaware of class exploitation? Yeah.
Like loss and loss consumption.
Pardon?
Consumption.
No? So, yeah,
Is that massive production of wealth?
not really. Yeah.
The myth of a classless society.
Okay, and you watch what economic theory supplies you with this utopian myth of a non-class society. Adam Smith. He's lovely. That's what he just did. In part what he did. Adam Smith is Smith's classical and then neoclassical theory is one of the most powerful theories in the entire world. It's the air we breathe, even if you haven't studied it. Right? Former President Bush might not have been a student of neoclassical. Actually, he was, which might be out. So I know it's. He took the course. So I take back what I was going to say. I know. I mean, I taught there for many years, so I know what he has about. So he studied neoclassical theory. But even if people who hadn't studied it, they understand unconsciously what this theory is, which is just what you just said. There's an absence of class exploitation in the United States. That enables class exploitation to continue. That's an ironic twist. Neoclassical theory, the theory that follows from Smith, says there's no class exploitation. The source of profit, that's what I put on the blackboard last time, the source of profit, the source of surplus, the source of returns to capital, is the marginal product of capital times the preference of people to hold capital. That theory says there's no class exploitation. So one of the cultures that has to be present in communism is a theory that argues against that. That's Marxian theory. That you have a clash of two different theories in two different kinds of economic societies. I'll stop next time on Thursday.